Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I feel like I'm in a room of Presbyterians. You're all spread out all over the place. You want to come down closer? Or you just want to stay out there, huh? Well, okay. Dr. Brown asked me to talk to you today about sport ethics, and it's like what's going on currently in sport in the United States is phenomenal. Larry Nassar, what does that name mean? Who is Larry Nassar? Larry Nassar. Yes, sir. He is the Michigan State physician who violated over 200 women through a vaginal technique that is used to align the hip joints. I have one of my doc students is an athletic trainer. And when the Larry Nassar case come forward, I said to David, my doc student, is this best practice? And he said, well, it's common practice. Now, what I'm talking about is in the sport of gymnastics. I actually was a gymnast 1,000 years ago, and I don't look like a gymnast. I'm a big woman, but I was a gymnast during a period of time in which you could be a big woman. But in gymnastics, there's a lot of rotation and a lot of landing, and the landing causes a lot of problems. Majority of women in gymnastics today have spinal fractures. Just to give you an idea about the sport. Rotation, landing, stick it. Stick it. Well, folks, that's not the way landings occur. When you come down, you have to absorb that force. And so they say stick it. That means that you have to be able to absorb all that force right directly through the body. Majority of women in athletics, in gymnastics, have severe problems with their backs and joints. So one of the ways to treat that is because misalignment happens so often in the hip joint. They try to figure out a way to get those hip alignment back together. And one of the techniques was to use vaginal penetration to push against the joint to realignment. Now, when David told me all about how it's done, I said, David, it's common practice or is it best practice? When you think about the vaginal penetration to do that, just think about that a little bit, what that means. How are you going to do that in such a way not to violate the young woman? Just because we can do it, should we do it? Well, apparently it didn't work very well. But there are many individuals in this country in athletic training who actually do this treatment. I don't know that it's best practice. Is there another way that we could help that alignment without doing vaginal penetration? Yesterday, the dean of the College of Osteopathic Medicine at Michigan State was arrested. He was Larry Nassar's boss. He was sort of dismissed in December. They arrested him because he had pornography, but he also had pictures of Nassar penetrating these women. Those are issues, folks. That has to do with sport ethics. So what is sport ethics? Another thing going on right now in sport in America is the question of football. I'm on the President's Athletic Council here at the University of Idaho, and I'm sure a lot of people are not happy about that because I ask the same question every time we meet, and this is my question. I'm also the chair of Institutional Review Board here in the university for human subject research. One of our responsibilities as researchers at any institution is to protect our subjects. we are to do no harm. No harm. So any researcher here at the institution who works with human subjects, and Dr. Brown is one of those people, you have to go through Institutional Review Board, and a number of our peers evaluate our work. We are to do no harm. We are to do good and do no harm. So I sit on the President's Athletic Council and I ask this question every time. We know that football as it is practiced today causes harm. The problem of CTE and the number of concussions and the young men who are affected by this activity is probably anywhere from 80 to 90%. Why do we play football at a research institution that is dedicated to doing no harm? Now, everybody loves football. We historically have loved football since the day it came across the field. Here at the University of Idaho, our football heritage is very old. It dates back to the 1904-05. Been here a long time. In fact, if you go to Memorial Gym, look up at the gym. The gargoyles are football players. It was always thought that football helps build character. In fact, when football came about in the early years of this country, it was a means of measuring whether a man was a gentleman, whether he was a team player, and an educated man valued competition. So, we have done this sport forever, but should we? One of my doc students is actually a former professional football player. And we have lots of debates on this thing. And he keeps telling me there's a way to play the game without those hits occurring to the head. So if we can do that, we need to do it, but at this moment, it's not happening. So what is sport ethics? So I've gave you two extreme examples of the harm that is done. But what is sport ethics? That's not exactly what I want. I think it jumped somewhere. Dr. Katie, I don't know what it just did, but it didn't do what I wanted to do. It went all the way to the bottom. Interesting. Okay, what makes an issue ethical as it relates to sport? Does anybody want to help me with this? What makes an issue ethical? What makes an issue ethical? Well, ethics has to do with how we treat each other. When we play, one thing about sports and games and why it's always been a part of the whole notion of education in this country, and it has been from the very beginning, and it comes to us from actually our English counterparts. It comes from the notion of Olympism. And it has to do with this thing of that education through sport helps develop us as people. General Douglas MacArthur, United States Military Academy, I spent a year there, and in my office hung this sign. On the fields of friendly strife are sown the seeds that in other days and other fields will bear the fruits of victory. That sport is one of the venues to building character. And when we talk about character, sport for sure builds character in a very social sense. Hard work, dedication, sacrifice, intensity, teamwork, functioning, working together. Fortune 500 companies prefer people with an athletic background because they know what teamwork is. However, there is no research anywhere in this country that shows that sport builds moral character. How do I know that? I direct the Center for Ethics. We are the largest reservoir of information on moral development in sport in the world. Over 100,000 points of reference. But we say it does. If you look at the mission statement of universities and colleges across the United States and you ask them why they have athletics, they will always talk about the notion that sport builds character. Character is the notion that one understands what it is to be honest and fair and just, responsible. It is true that sport builds camaraderie. It is true that sport builds team loyalty. A few years ago, one of my other doc students, we had done quite a bit of study in the area of character development in sport, and we did not have any information, and still don't today, that shows that sport develops moral character. Andy, my doc student, said, Dr. Stoll, you're measuring the wrong thing. Why don't you measure what sport really does do? It's the social character variables. Honesty, hard work, dedication, loyalty, intensity, sacrifice. That's what sport does. So we went on a journey and we studied it. And Andy was right. Sport does those things. However, Andy never answered my question. And my bigger question was, Andy, just because one's hardworking, dedicated, loyal, intense doesn't mean that one has moral character, because one can be an intense rapist. Those variables have little meaning if they are not framed in a moral mission. So what makes an issue ethical as it relates to sport? It has to do with how we value each other as we play a game. Because ethics has to do with our relationships with other people. Expectations. We give our word. We expect a sense of fair play. We expect people to follow the rules. That's the whole notion of what ethics is in sport. However, what do we actually practice in this country? We don't practice what we say we practice. Everyone clear on his assignment? Who takes out the ref? One of the instruments that we use in moral development and measuring character has to do with a scenario about telling the ref if you violate a rule. One of the scenarios are two volleyball players go up, opposing players, one touches the ball, no one sees it, that it was a touch. Should that player tell the referee? 95% of all the athletes would say no, we never tell the referee. 1993-94, I was in residence at the United States Military Academy at West Point as part of their character education program. Well, it's one of the greatest experiences I've ever had, mainly because I'd never been around anything like it before, and I got to spend a lot of time with important people, like General Schwarzkopf. But anyhow, I was there and I was working with a group of athletes who are also part of the Christian athlete group, which is probably every athlete at the academy because there are no atheists in foxholes. But I was working with them, and one of the benefits of being at the academy was my husband and I were invited to be in the superintendent's box at a football game. And you haven't lived in a real football experience if you've been at an academy for a football game, because there is true tradition. Mickey Stadium sits on the Hudson. They fire off howitzers when any kind of score is made. They march in 1,000 cadets before the game. The ball is delivered via cadet who's jumped out of a helicopter. And from nowhere, because you don't hear the helicopter, from nowhere he drifts down into the middle of the field with the ball in his hand, and he gives it to the referee, and the cadets go crazy. The mules run around the field. plebes do push-ups. It's a great experience. Well, my husband and I got to spend a day in the superintendent's box, and I'd been working with the football team for some time. And we had talked quite a bit about this scenario about, do you tell the referee when you violate a rule? We have to remember, though, that the whole purpose of the academy is to develop leaders of character for the common defense of the United States. Cadet will not lie, cheat, nor steal, nor tolerate those that do. So we're playing games and sport, strategies and competitions and whatnot. United States Military Academy, Army, doesn't win a lot of games because they have a very strict physical fitness code, and it really causes problems with trying to do all the stuff that needs to be done at football. So they don't win a lot. So I'm sitting in the superintendent's box with my husband, and he's really enjoying it. And the cadets score a touchdown. Oh my goodness, everybody was so excited. The howitzer went off, the plebes were doing push-ups, everybody's running up and down, joint, whatever, all the stuff, right? And the young man who scored the touchdown walked back to the referee and said something to him. And the referee nullified the score. Superintendent went nuts. Superintendent, well, that's, by the way, it's a 4-star general. Superintendent jumps up, runs out of the box, goes down on the field. I don't know what kind of confrontation went on, but something went on down there. Pretty soon he comes back up, and he says, "Stoll, I want to see you right now." When a 4-star general says, "I want to see you right now," you move your ASS right now. So I got over to him, I said, "Yes, sir, what's the problem, sir?" He said, "Have you been working with Cadet Jones?" "Yes, sir, I've been working with the whole football team." And he said, "You know what happened down there?" I said, "No, sir. I have an idea." He said, "What's your idea?" He said, "Cadet Jones stepped out of bounds somewhere." I said, "Yes, he did." And he told the referee, because the referee never caught it, so they nullified it. And then the superintendent then said to me, after he looked at me a little bit, and he said, "Stoll, that's what you get for teaching character." In my morning meetings with my young cadets, one of the great stories I have about the academy is that the Fellowship of Christian Athletes meet at like 5 a.m. in the morning, and as I said, there are no atheists in foxholes. So Fellowship of Christian Athletes is a very important organization, and we met at 5 a.m. for breakfast, and the place was packed. The whole football team was there. And the chaplain wanted me to talk to the kids about intimidation. If you've ever been an athlete, you know that intimidation is an important part of athletics. Getting in the head of your opponent is an important part of what you do. It's part of the strategies. I was working with them about intimidation, and I had a whole group of brothers who were sitting over in one corner, and I said, "What's the role of intimidation in sport?" And one of the young men said, "My job is to take them out so they can't play." And so he's very vocal about that. Well, I wanted to ask the logical question, if you take them out so you can't play, who do you play? If that's the goal, who do you play if you take them out? The chaplain went over to me and said, "Would you ask this question instead? Would you do the same thing?" Was the young man said, "My job is to take them out. My job is to intimidate them, take them out, stand over them and say, 'Sucker, don't get up.'" And the chaplain came over and he said, "Dr. Stoll, would you ask them if they would do the same thing if they were playing Jesus the Christ?" Now I wanted to ask the logical question, you know, who do you play if the sucker doesn't get up? So I did. I asked the question. Would you do the same thing if you were playing Jesus the Christ? The young man said, "Ma'am, I am as Christian as the next guy, but I leave God on the bench." Poor chaplain was having a heart apoplexy. And when he said that, the young man, I leave God on the bench, another kid jumped up and said, "Ma'am, he's got that completely wrong. Jesus the Christ was played just as viciously as I played." By this time, the poor chaplain, I thought we were going to have to get him help. Whatever. Bell rang, time to go to class, whatever. The chaplain went over and grabbed these two cadets. Then I felt really bad because I thought they're going to be in trouble for something I did. I mean, I intentionally set them up because I knew they were what they're going to say. So I left and went about doing my duties, and about 11:30 in the morning, I walked by the chaplain's office, and the two cadets were just coming out. So he had them from 6 a.m. until 11:30. So I walked to the chaplain's office, and the cadet academy is known for the gray glums. That whole place is gray. Everything's gray. Uniforms gray. In March, everything's gray, right? Walked to the chaplain's office, and it's a beautiful office. It's got wingback chairs. There is a fireplace burning. Oh, a great place to hang out. And I sat down with the chaplain, and I said, "Sir, I really feel bad about Cadet Jones and Smith because they missed all those morning classes. There are going to be demerits for that." And I kind of set them up. And chaplain said, "Dr. Stoll, those two cadets have committed to the seminary. They will be going to seminary after they finish their 4th year here. And both those young men are sons of pastors. And one said he leaves God on the bench, and the other one says Jesus the Christ would play as viciously as he does. Something is wrong here." Well, that has to do with the value of what we see as competition. As you look at the slide that's on the board right now, every one of you who have ever played sport knows that you play the referee. Is that not true? Everyone plays the referee. So who takes out the referee? 2 years ago, there was a high school basketball team in Texas who actually did take out the referee. Nailed the referee. I got a telephone call from a television station, and they wanted me to say all kinds of bad things about these young kids. And I said, 2 young kids in high school did not come up with the idea of taking out the ref. Someone told them to do it. And when they actually looked into it, it was the coaches to take out the ref. It actually occurred. So sport ethics is how we treat each other, but it also has to do with the value that we look at in the game itself. Do we value the rules? Sport is bounded by rules and by how we function within those rules. It also has to do with how we treat each other. I coached for a number of years, and I'm a very competitive person, and I am not a shrinking violet at all. I coached gymnastics, and I actually won the state championship with a group of very fine young athletes. But I tell you, competition's an interesting thing and what it does for people. I had originally at one time had thought about studying for the ministry, but decided to go into education instead. I have a pretty good sense of what is right and what's wrong. But competition is an interesting thing because when you're a competitor, you try to figure out ways to gain advantage, correct? That's what you do. I was coaching gymnastics, and I had the state high school level vaulter in the state of Ohio, and it's a pretty good sized state, lots of competition there. And Janie was one hellaciously great athlete. I'm 5'7". I put my arms up, probably about maybe 5'7", an extra 2 feet, 7 feet more tall, right? Put my hands up. Janie, vaulting, you run down a path, you sprint. There is a Ruther board, which is a springboard, and the Ruther board is between the vault and the sprinter. Janie would run down this field, hell-bent straight ahead, and her board was 1.5 distance of my body length from the vault. 1.5 distance of my body length, okay? She would hit that board, and I could stand in front of the vault, put my hands up, and Janie would vault over me, okay? Now, why I did that in gymnastics was when I make sure I have her alignment correct. So she's falling down through there, bing, over me, does the trick. Great, great athlete. We had a dual meet. This is why I got out of coaching, because of something I did that day. We had a dual meet with a school that wasn't anywhere near the caliber of what Janie was or any of my athletes. Well, the first round was vaulting, and so what they do in gymnastics is that your team rotates through the events by team. So all my girls would vault at the same time, okay? So we as a team vaulted, we as a team did bars, we as a team did beam, we as a team did floor. So you just move around, okay? So Janie was going to do her vault, and as coaches do in gymnastics, you're doing a lot of talking, because what you're trying to do is have the athlete think in some kind of a pattern. We actually had things like mantras for them. And so what I would say to Janie, feet, hands, feet, hands, feet, hands, because her feet would leave the board and she would be traveling, and it's called pre-flight, over me, whatever. See, there's a little mantra. Janie did her vault, it was great. Always was great. She did her second vault, it was even better than the first one. She scored something like a 9.4 or whatever. The whole group did very well. I think all four of them, no one scored less than like an 8.8. So that's good, all right? We walked away from the vault, and Janie said, "Coach, they didn't move the board." Now remember, she's the state champion. No one vaulted the pre-flight that she did, no one. "Coach, they didn't move the board." And I said, "Janie, we are going to the bars. Let's focus on what we're supposed to be doing." And Janie said, "Coach, they didn't move the board." Just about this time, competitor on the other team comes running hell-bent down through there, hits that board, and there's no place to go because she doesn't have any pre-flight. So here's his body going through the air, go bam, right into that vault. Luckily, she didn't get hurt that time. Bounced off the vault and got up. We're continuing on to the bars, and Janie says, "You're not going to believe this, Coach. They didn't move the board a second time. She's going to go back and do that again." And I said, "Janie, hey, pay attention. Let's talk about the bars. We got to be looking at what we're doing." "But Coach, they're not moving the board. Go do something." I didn't. I did nothing. A girl comes barreling down through there and hit that vault, the Ruther board, came right into that vault, chest right into it, kaboom, knocked the wind out of her, and she's laying there in a puddle. And Janie turned to me and said, "Great coaching, Coach." Walked away from there that day. Of course, we won the meet. Walked away from there that day, and I thought, you know, what in the hell are you doing, Stoll? What have you become? Ethics is really important, folks. And competition does interesting things to people. Really good people do really stupid things in sport. Joe Paterno. I met Joe Paterno. Joe Paterno was a very good man. And what did he do? Joe Paterno protected a serial pedophile, Jerry Sandusky. Why did he do that? Not because he valued Jerry Sandusky, but because he was concerned about what all of that would do to the image of Penn State. Everyone in the administrative chain knew what was going on with Jerry Sandusky, and they did nothing. Joe Paterno unfortunately lost his position and then died very soon after that. And just this past year, the president of the institution was sentenced to federal prison. Good people making really stupid decisions. Unbelievably stupid decisions. And it seems to happen so often in sport. One thing about my job is that, well, every day there's something going to happen somewhere because we make such really stupid decisions. Earl Ziegler, who was one of our most prolific writers in the field of sport ethics, said that the sole most important study in sport today is sport ethics. Because it has to do with how we treat each other. How do we treat each other? So let's look at some issues as we go along here. In sport, we do a lot with advantage, right? Advantage is pretty much the name of the game of what we do in trying to gain a win. There's nothing wrong with wanting to win. Nothing. There's nothing wrong with preparing oneself to try to do the win. The question is not whether you want to win, it's what are you willing to do to win? Not that you want to win, but what are you willing to do to win? I grew up in a place just outside of Massillon, Ohio. Akron, Ohio. Football Hall of Fame, right? Canton, Ohio, Akron, Ohio, Massillon, Ohio. Grew up there, and I have this little cartoon up here, and it's Beetle Bailey, and he's saying, "You're just mad because I have a friend in the carpet shop." That's not it. They have oversized tennis rackets and oversized golf clubs, don't they? So what's your problem? Gaining advantage through equipment is a very, very long way we get to do work, whatever. Anyone know the name of Paul Brown? Okay, how many guys played football in high school? Where are you? Okay. All right, one of you. Who was Paul Brown? Oh, come on. Cleveland Browns. Well, I'll help you. Paul Brown started his coaching career in 1928 in a town called Massillon, Ohio. Massillon, Ohio is outside of Canton, and Massillon, Ohio is the Massillon Tigers. It's one of the best high school football teams in America. He started his career there in 1928. He went from Massillon, Ohio to Miami of Ohio, from Miami, Ohio to The Ohio State University, in which he won the national championship a number of times before there was a national championship, but they counted it anyhow. He went from there to, during World War II, to the Great Lakes Naval Station where he taught football. And then at the end of the war, in 1947, he helped establish this team called the Cleveland Browns. Established that team, named the Browns for a reason. It's named after him, but it's also named for the jerseys, and I'll tell you why in a minute. He got fired by Art Modell because they got in a big fight about Jimmy Brown. He was a great football player. And Paul Brown then started the Cincinnati Bengals. If you played football, you have some thanks to give to Paul Brown because he's the one who came up with thigh pads. He's the one that came up with an idea of the better shoulder pads. Much of the great strategy of the game comes from Paul Brown. 1928, he was coaching at Massillon, Ohio, and his team was not very good. So he looked at the rule book and he considered, how can I gain an advantage? So he came up with a novel idea because in 1928, it didn't say anything about what a uniform should look like. It just said you should have one. And he looked, he thought, what can there's a lot I can do with this. So what he did was he took footballs and cut them lengthwise and sewed 1/2 of a football on the front of the jersey of all the backfield. So all the backfield has a 1/2 a football sewed on their jersey. And when the quarterback passes off, the whole backfield just bends over, everybody's got a ball. 1929, there was a rule against that. You can't do that anymore. 1928, it worked for a little bit. Those of you who played football, how would you feel if you came on the field and your whole opposing side, backfield, had footballs on them? How would you respond? Gentlemen who play football, where are you? How would you respond? This guy over here. Yeah. Would you do anything?
Well, I feel like it'd be a little bit easier to rip the ball.
Get a little rough out there, wouldn't it? It did. It got really chaotic because guys were PO'd, right? They start trying to tear the jerseys off each other and chaos. But it worked for a while. He was also the basketball coach in 1928 at Massillon, Ohio. And at that time, every side out resulted in a jump ball. They don't do that anymore. They don't want anyone jump balling at all because somebody will step on somebody and tear an Achilles, right? So you don't even see it anymore. But every side out started with a jump ball. And his guys couldn't jump. So he tried to figure out, how am I going to get an advantage? Now, this is a true story. This is a phenomenal story. He took the basketballs and put them in a freezer and froze them. And every side out, they would get one of these basketballs out of the freezer. Now, I tried this with our basketball team here at Idaho, and I don't think I've ever laughed so hard in my life because we didn't tell them what we were doing. So you throw the ball in the air, and you do a jump shot, and the other guy gets the ball. What does a basketball do when you dribble? Well, it doesn't dribble. It's got dead air. And so you get the ball and you dribble, and the ball doesn't come back to your hand. It goes across the floor. The look on the players' faces when we did this was just hysterical. If no one knows you're doing it, you're going to get the ball because they don't know what's going to happen. So Paul Brown's team could not get the jump shot, get the jump ball. They wouldn't get the ball. The other team would get it. It'd dribble, and the dribble wouldn't come back, and they get it. Every basketball game now, it's a rule. What does the referee have to do? The very first thing the referee does is check the rebound capacity of the ball. That's Paul Brown. Paul Brown did that. Now here's a question for all of you. It was not against the rule in 1928. It was not against the rule to sew footballs on jerseys. It was not against the rule to freeze basketballs. It was in 1929. No rules against it. Was it cheating? Was it cheating? There were no rules against the game. No rules against this. Someone's got to talk up here. Come on, respond. Tell me. These two guys right in front. You're paying attention. I really appreciate it. Was it cheating?
I'd say based on how the game was defined at the time.
You have to speak it real loud for me.
I was saying, based on how the game was defined, like you're saying, the rules that were in place, I would say no, it was not cheating. It was injury at that point. And then after speculation,
so there are no rules against it, so it would not be cheating, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
The game itself is a construct, so by adding new pieces to that, who's to say it's incorrect or...
What's the spirit of a rule?
Oh, sorry, what's going on?
Oh, I know. I'm sure you never even ever heard of that. A spirit of a rule. You ever heard of a spirit of a rule? Spirit of the rule is the intention of the rule, okay? Intention of the rule. Quite a bit has been written on this. Quite a bit has been written on the sense that the spirit of the rule should carry the rule. Because if it's only the rule, we are smart buggers. We will figure out ways to get around the rules, won't we? We've all done it. every one of us in sport have used gaining advantage. Every one of us have figured out a ways to do that. I'm a consultant for World Anti-Doping Organization, an agency, USADA, United States Anti-Doping Agency, and I have been at many meetings with them in which they have problems with people not valuing the rules. Russian athletes were banned from the last games, Winter Games, because systematic cheating, doping in Russia. That's nothing new, folks. That's from 1948. This has been going on since 48. This is nothing new. They don't value the rule. And the spirit of the rule is actually the intentionality of the rule. One of our problems is in this country and in competition per se, we want rules to define everything. But if we don't value what the rule is, we all have trouble. I mean, I am just as guilty as anybody else. It is really hard because you pore over the rules all the time to find strategies to gain advantages. All of us do it. I don't care who it is, everybody does it. But is it, remember I started this thing? Is it best practice? It may be common practice, but is it best practice? That's the issue that we're dealing with. 1928 with Paul Brown, was it against the rules? Was it cheating? What is cheating? Cheating is intentionally on purpose violating a rule. How often do we do that? What about the good foul? You ever played basketball, the good foul? Is that cheating? No, yes, no. Some people say it is, and other people say no. It's just a part of the strategy of the game. What is it? I mentioned to you that I am a consultant for the United States Anti-Doping Agency. I've been working with them for about 20 years. I was in the room the day the United States Anti-Doping Agency brought forth their 1,100-page document against Lance Armstrong. How many of you had a Livestrong bracelet? The guy was a heroic bugger, right? Everybody wanted to have one of those. Armstrong, systematic cheating for a long, long period of time. Lied so long, no one knew what the lie was. He was brought down because the United States Anti-Doping Agency is in the business of having what's called true sport. Travis Taggart, the administrative director of U.S. USADA. I've known him a long time. I'm not a friend or anything like that. I just know him because I'm a consultant with the group. Lance Armstrong always looked good and healthy. Travis Taggart looks like shit. Sorry for that expression, but that's the way he looks. He just literally has gone, it's been horrible. His life has been threatened. His family's been threatened. His children have been threatened. Because no one believed that Lance Armstrong could be a cheater. Travis Taggart took that journey and decided it was worth it to show that cheating is not acceptable. Taggart never got Armstrong to admit it, but Oprah did. I don't know how that happened, but Oprah got him to do it. And he admitted to what he did. But he said everyone had to do it. Everyone had to cheat because everybody was cheating. 1988, I was in the Olympic Games in Seoul, Korea. when the Ben Johnson fiasco occurred. Remember that one? Ben Johnson was one of the only athletes from Canada to win a gold medal in track and field. 100 meters. His coach was a guy by the name of Charlie Francis, who was actually banned by athletics and as well as the United States Olympic Organization because of systematic cheating that went on for a long time in athletics. But I was there when that all went down with Ben Johnson, and Ben Johnson said the reason he had testosterone or elevated testosterone in his body was because of ginseng tea. No, it wasn't. So Johnson was actually then lost his medal. But what's interesting about the story of Ben Johnson is that two things. Number two, Canada was so embarrassed. Canada is very different than the United States in how they look at sport and athletics. It's very different. It was a matter of true national pride because they had said for so long that they did it the right way. One of my good friends, Angela Snyder, actually sat on the committee that looked into the Ben Johnson scenario. And it's called the Dubin Inquiry, if you ever want to look it up. It's called the Dubin Inquiry. And they found out some interesting things by investigating what went on with Ben Johnson, because it's the same issue that goes on with athletes who get into systematic cheating. Number one was Ben Johnson had no autonomy. No self-governance, no decision-making. He was completely manipulated by his coaches. The second thing that they found out is actually changed testing in the United States as well as across the world for cheating, was that if you want to catch the cheaters, you've got to be systematic in how you test for them. It's called random, out-of-season, unannounced testing, RUT. However, that doesn't really work the best way either. Larry Bowers, who is the scientific officer for United States Anti-Doping, last I was there a year ago, he said, "Why didn't we catch Lance Armstrong? I will tell you why. If you want to catch someone using performance-enhancing drugs, you would have to test at least 3 times a year, and probably in 7 years you would catch them." Now, what does that tell us? Dr. Bowers, what does that mean? That means that we can't stay ahead of the chemistry. We can't stay ahead of it. When last I was there with them, I've been arguing for years and years with them that education is as important as testing, but nobody wants to listen to me. Darn it. I keep trying to talk them to give me $1 million, but they won't do it. Education is important. It's imperative. I was also there a few years ago when Michelle Collins, who was one of our U.S. athletes, had to give her testimony to USADA about how Charlie Francis, the same guy who was involved with Ben Johnson and now her coach, how he manipulated her to become a user. And she said, well, I should say, give the rest of the story. People who run USADA and WADA are very intellectual. I was there at USADA with all the blood chemists. Very brilliant, a lot of arrogance. And they were trying to find out, when at the time prior with Michelle Collins, they kept thinking that the reason why these athletes are using is because, well, Michelle Collins is black, so therefore she must not know any better. So a very racist perspective. Michelle Collins got up in the room, and the first thing they asked her, they said was, do you come from a two-parent family? And she turned to him and she said, most certainly I come from a two-parent family. I'm college educated and my family is educated. Well, how did you not know any better? She said, I did know better. But the problem is when you get involved in high-level sport, remember I just talked about competition and what competition does to you? David Shields, a very important writer in our field, said that there is negative competition and then there is true competition. Negative competition is seeing the opponent as someone to overcome. Positive competition is seeing the opponent as someone to work with. Two very different perspectives. Shell said, I knew it was wrong, but I was told again and again and again and again that the only way I could win was to take this stuff, and so I did it. I knew better, but I did it. Another athlete at the time was also a black female athlete, Kelly White. She gave up and gave her story. It was the same thing, from an educated family. And she said, I knew better from the very beginning, and I was so guilt-stricken when I won the gold medal that I couldn't even do the victory lap because I knew I was wrong. Both she, Kelly White, and Michelle Collins were the same group of athletes got caught in the Balco scandal. You know Balco? Balco had to do with the Bay Area Laboratory. That's the group that got involved with developing specific synthetic steroids for athletes. Barry Bonds. Barry Bonds, famous baseball player who will probably never get in the Hall of Fame because of the cheating that went on. Marion Jones, one of our greatest athletes, was caught in this controversy, and she lied to the federal court and she went to jail. Same day that Marion Jones was in court and gave her testimony and lied to them, Michelle Collins and Kelly White both said, we were ready to go in and lie, but instead when we got to the door we realized we couldn't. So both of them came clean under testimony, and so in order to come back to sport they had to give their stories in front of people like me who sat and listened to their stories. Advantage, gaining advantage. It's a hard thing to deal with, folks. It really is. And sport is just one place where it happens. It happens in everything that we do, gaining advantage. Why do people cheat? Because someone thinks it's important to try to gain some kind of advantage. So even though there's no rule against it, we should think about it, because there's a spirit that lies underneath all of that, okay? So the spirit behind all of it. Last I was with USADA, I told you about the blood chemists. For years and years, sport has had to try to come to grips with fair competition in the sense of competing against people like who we are. 1928, there was a famous athlete who ran against and with Babe Dickerson, and her name was Stacy Walsh, and that was not her real name, but that's the name that she ran under. A few years ago, she was murdered in Cleveland, Ohio, and an autopsy was done, and she had no external female organs. She was raised as a woman. In the early part of this last century, the International Olympic Committee knew they had a problem because there were individuals who were intersex. That's the word we use today. It's called intersex. They are individuals that have characteristics of both genders. And women who are intersex tend to be very athletic, and they will rise to the surface. And there is a number of those women who are competing today, as well as what at the turn of the century. The International Olympic Committee at first said, we have to ferret those people out. They should not be competing. And so they tried to figure out ways to ferret them out. How we've got into urine testing was because of this phenomena. One way they tried to ferret the women out was actually look at their genitals to see if they were women. You can imagine how humiliating that would be. Another one was buccal smears. Take cells from the cheek, examine whether they have the right XY chromosome. That worked real well until they told a woman that she wasn't a woman and she was 6 months pregnant. And that didn't work very well. But they've been using urine tests for some time, but then we moved into the drug age, and that's another whole story, how we got into the drug age and where that came from. Urine testing, as Larry Bowers said, is not the best way because we can't catch people because the chemistry is too far ahead of the testing. So when I was there last, they're now talking about blood testing. And some interesting things, Dr. Brown, I didn't know about blood testing. Do you know that if someone holds your finger and squeezes it and it takes a piece of blood, that the chemistry of the blood changes because of the squeezing? How do you know that? I mean, I didn't know that. Of course, I don't know anything about blood chemistry either, but it was like, what in the world? And so now they are actually trying to figure out, WADA is trying to figure out a way to take blood without putting any stress on the individual, because that's what has to be in order to blend it down or whatever they do with it, right? Millions of dollars being spent on this thing, right? The other way they're going to be testing, which they're not so sure about this one though, they're going to take pubic hair. I'm in a room with all men, by the way, okay? It's all the blood chemists were all, at this meeting was all men. And I'm listening to this, and I'm thinking, pubic hair. So I put my hand up, I couldn't help myself. And I said, what are you going to do about Brazilians? And the one guy says, well, what is that, what do we care about people from Brazil? Now, the women in this room are laughing because they know what I'm talking about, right? Women want to be clean, and so they get rid of pubic hair. It's called a Brazilian, right? So I had to explain this to this 130-some physicians or blood chemists. It's funny. It is funny. This woman down here is laughing like, man, it's funny. Because they thought they had it figured out. This problem of testing is a real issue. The question of intersect athletes in the last year has finally got to a place where they've just said, they did in the last 2 games, is we're not worried about it anymore. We're not going to test. Because these young women did nothing, not one thing did they do to become an intersect. They just are. They did nothing wrong. So that's where wherever they are right now. Women who are not intersect, who are competing against women who are intersect, complain. Because they do have an advantage, no doubt about it. So this thing about advantage, now look at home court advantage. Score and die is a true coach that no visiting team has made a layup this year. Think about home court advantage. Think about what we do on home court advantage. Our football team always tells me that, you know, you got to worry about Montana. We're going to start playing Montana now in football, right? I understand that Montana has the best potato throwers in the world. When you walk through the area to go into the game at Montana, the potatoes are not cooked. They are actually raw potatoes, and the guys talk about what it's like to get hit in the head with a potato. Home court advantage. How many of you have a t-shirt that says, what's that saying about us? Inebriated and nasty? Nasty and inebriated? Anybody have t-shirts? Anybody know what I'm talking about? What's nasty and inebriated? Where did it come from? Gentlemen, who knows the story? What is it? Yes, sir.
Producer came an article calling vandals nasty and inebriated.
It was an article. It was the president of Boise State University. We had a game here. Now you want to talk about one of the most interesting things is the history of alcohol on this campus. You could write a dissertation on alcohol, football on this campus. First year I was here, 1980, I went to a football game in the Dome and got hit by a beer. It wasn't a stein, it was what? Like a barrel. What do they call those things? They're throwing these things up and down the things inside the student section. Bang, right in the back of the head. Well, what's that, right? That was the year they banned it, 1980. No more alcohol in the Dome because it got out of hand, right? And that lasted for a long time until we started to lose. When we started to lose, I had to figure a way to get people to come to the games. Let's do tailgating. So we decided to do tailgating. Now, one of the things we forgot to do is ask permission. One of the things I learned in life about that is probably smart not to ask permission, because you ask permission, people are going to say no. So just go ahead and do it. So they decided to do tailgating. First year we did tailgating. Brilliant idea. Let the people drink out in the parking lot of the Dome, and then the police will just usher people into the Dome. Well, that didn't go very well because people are drunk and the police are trying to usher them in, and that didn't go well at all. So they kind of changed that up a little bit, and then they said, well, you can go into the game, you can back out at halftime, and you can do whatever. Now, when the tailgating occurred on campus, all the parking lots are used for tailgating, right? Everybody's doing a tailgate somewhere on campus. The last time we played Boise State in the Dome, the last time we played them, I was at that game, and that Dome was full. It was cool. It was full, right? The president of Boise State University parks his car on the other end of the Dome parking lot and walks through that tailgate with his blue and orange on. Oh, I'm sure he was received really well. So he writes a letter, and he calls the University of Idaho nasty and inebriated, right? And we wear that like a badge, right? Everybody had a t-shirt. Do we still print those anymore? It's kind of interesting. And home court advantage. How many of you played sport in high school? How many of you were in a fight in a sport contest in high school? Oh, gee, you haven't lived it, you haven't done that. You don't know if you had a fight or not? What does that mean? Yes? No?
Means I got tossed.
How many of you played and it wasn't safe and you went somewhere, you played a game against somebody else and it wasn't safe to even get in the bus to get home? One person? It used to be everywhere I coached. I coached the inner city in Akron, Ohio, and it was like interesting. Home court advantages. How many of you played a game in which the fans were out of hand? Well, here at University of Idaho, we have fans out of hand all the time. Go to the game sometime and listen to what's being said. Some interesting stuff goes on, okay? It's called home court advantage, and we do it. Back when I was coaching, there were many times that we'd win the game and lose the fight. I don't think we ever won the game and won the fight. I think we won the game and lost the fight. Home court advantage. It's a part of what goes on out there. You all know what I'm talking about because you've seen it. I'm running up at the end of the hour. Do you have any questions for me? Got 10 minutes left. Have any questions? Yes, sir.
Did you ever coach anything besides gymnastics?
Did I coach anything else besides gymnastics? I coached gymnastics at all levels. I coached with a guy by the name of Rudy Bachna, who was the assistant gymnastics coach for the United States in 1956 and 1960, and I coached at that level with him, okay? And he was an SOB. He was absolutely a horrible person, but boy, was he successful. I coached high school volleyball and basketball. I probably should have paid them because I was actually a gymnast, and then I was in skating. I was actually a professional skater for a while, but so I skated at the highest level. But I'm a very competitive person, but no, I didn't coach. I coached those things, but not very well. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Has doping in the cycling field gone down since the last Armstrong?
Remember what Larry Bowers said? It's like looking at baseball players. If you look at the size of baseball players from Hank Aaron to today, there's a massive difference in body size. Now that could be just really great nutrition, but I don't know. Last I was at USADA, Larry Bowers got up and they were talking about GNC. Anybody go to GNC? They were talking about GNC and they were talking about supplements, and he said, how many people in this room take supplements? I do. Yeah, I take a whole lot of them in the morning. You know, I'm older than dirt. I take anything I get my hands on, try to keep myself a little bit young, right? And he told us that supplements are probably the worst thing, a violation of, because you're getting so much stuff. He said, do you know where the majority of stuff comes from for supplements? Mexico and China. There's no FDA in those countries, right? So he said, you're probably all just taking cat pee. That's his words. You're probably just taking cat pee. So every morning I get up and look at my cat pee and I take it. There's a lot of stuff. But yeah, doping is a real problem. I mean, I don't know that there's such a thing as clean sport anymore. Pandora got out of the box in '48. I don't think there's, I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. I know that USADA and WADA spent an awful lot of money trying to catch all that. You know, they are now keeping urine samples for 15 years. And they want to get in the blood business because they keep it longer. So they're going to keep those samples and keep testing them, and they're going to keep taking away metals from people, because if they can catch it down the road, they will. Questions? No more questions? Any questions? Sport ethics. This class is called
The Holistic Athlete.
The Holistic Athlete. Okay. You cover the whole basis of what? The spiritual, physical, psychological, nutritional?
We don't really get into spiritual. There's a lot of things there.
Oh, you ought to get into spiritual, because every athlete, I don't care who the athlete is, they have to go on a journey of their self in relationship to winning and losing. You really do. And that, how do you come back from a loss? How do you control yourself under a win? Those kind of things. Well, you guys, I could talk forever, but you should ask me some questions. Sport doesn't build character. Does that fuzz you up? Sport does not build moral character. Research is very clear about that. It does build social character. It's one of the things I talked to you about. It does not build moral character, but does build social character. And sport ethics, I think, is the most important study of all studies, because everything, what we do in relationship to each other, it's our relationships, how we treat each other, and how much we value a pledge that we make. We pledge we're going to follow the rules. Yes, sir?
So Like, I've heard arguments about normal athletes that know, such as Lance Armstrong and Barry Bonds, and obviously it made them phenomenal. Do you think that they would have still had great success without doping, or was all the success based on doping?
Barry Bonds would have made the Hall of Fame before he started taking anything. And what a hellacious athlete, right? I think baseball is probably one of the hardest. I love baseball. I love going to a game. You know, there's a guy by the name of A. Bartlett Giamonte, who was the former commissioner of baseball. He's the guy who fired Pete Rose. He wrote these beautiful pieces, lyrical pieces about baseball, about the blue of the sky and the green of the grass and the white uniform, and you're coming home, and it's just great stuff. I love baseball. But Barry Bonds, I mean, it was a really hard sport. Trying to hit that little tiny ball, it's coming at you 95 miles an hour, you gotta be one hellacious athlete, right? He would have made Hall of Fame before he did all that. It probably was tied up in that whole era in which they were in the, you know, the home run thing. And all those guys are trying to show each other, and they got into it. And they got into designer drugs, and that was Victor Kant with Balco. You go in there, and how, you know how they caught all that? It was one of the track coaches sent a syringe of this drug to USADA, and that's how they started going backwards to find out what was going on. And they found all these athletes who were clients of Victor Kant at Balco. Victor Kant also started GNC. They went back and started looking at the clients, and that's where they caught them. And they also got them through mail fraud because they were buying all this stuff through the mails. But Barry Bonds was one great athlete, no doubt about it. But you know, he lied, and his head size got bigger, feet got a lot bigger. I don't think you get that from eating milkshakes.
My question was also kind of about, like, being considered Hall of Fame, you know, if you remove that, you definitely win it. And I guess what I was going with that was, do you think that as soon as you cheat, all the things you accomplish you wipe away because you kind of beat yourself over? Or is that more from the person inside, each individual person?
That's a hard question, right? Most of those guys, they're just great athletes, correct? But the Hall of Fame has this interesting little thing about character in it. It's not just your statistics, it's also about your character. And every athlete gives their implied or explicit agreement to follow the rules. And those guys, all the guys who said, I did do it, we kind of forgive them. But that's guys who lied and lied and lied and lied. It's almost impossible to forgive them. And, you know, I think, isn't Barry Bonds his last year to be voted in? He's running out of time, isn't he? I think that's right. It's either the last couple of years. There's a whole group of those guys, right? Yeah, they were all great athletes, and on their own, you know, it's really a hard decision. But it has to be this tied to these rules again. You know, we say we're going to follow them. We say we respect the rules, we respect each other, this is what we're going to do. And those guys, Bonds, still lying. I mean, I suppose it's possible for your head size to get bigger, but I don't know how that happens. But it's just not good. So, yeah, it's really a sad case because those guys probably should be in the Hall of Fame. Bonds is in the Hall of Fame for the home run record, but he's not, I don't know if he's going to get voted in. He might get voted in as time goes on. I don't know. It's the same issue about Pete Rose, right? Right? Pete Rose never gambled against himself, but he lied. And he lied, and he lied. For 25 years, he lied, and then he told the truth. And it's an issue of character. That was A. Bartlett Giamonte fired him, and he said, they'll call me an idealist, but this is a sorry state, and it had to do with Rose lying all the time. So that's one of the problems with these guys is that if they came clean, they might be better off. I mean, I can understand taking. I understand how they got into it. It's the thing about being caught. That I don't understand. Because you're better off to tell the truth once you get caught than it is to just lie. There's something about people is we can handle cheaters, but we don't like liars. We're funny people. We can handle somebody cheating, but if they come clean, we can say, okay, we get it. Any other questions? I think we're out of time. All right, well, thank you.